Maybe we'll dive in and get started. I'm going to kick us off if that's okay for folks. And for folks who weren't on when I first introduced myself, I'm David Mazer, and I'm the Executive Director for Penn Environment. If you're not familiar with Penn Environment, we're a statewide, citizen-based environmental watchdog group. And I'm really excited here to be with a great group of panelists working on the webinar today. Let's see, maybe we can go to the first slide if that's okay, Heather, and give a quick overview on sort of the plan for the day. So we have a bunch of great speakers talking about the event. Number one, we're just going to talk a little bit about, number one, we're almost done with. We'll do introductions, and each speaker will give a little background about their work in the group when they come up to bat. We're going to start off in a minute here with Captain Evan Clark to talk about how they found plastic pellets and how that was discovered. We'll hear a little bit about the basis for the case and filing the suit from Evan as well. And then turn it over to Matt Donahue from the National Environmental Law Center, who will give some details on the settlement of the case. We'll talk about some of the broader implications of this settlement, not just for tackling plastic pellets here in Pennsylvania, but potentially all across the country. Hear about why this is a threat to our health and environment and why this successful case is so important to the local watershed. And then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So I think that's sort of the basics. Maybe we can go to the next slide quickly before I hand it over to Captain Evan. For folks who aren't familiar with the geography we're talking about, we have a lot of folks here from all over the state, as I mentioned a minute ago. The case we're going to talk about today is a facility located on Raccoon Creek. And as the slide says here, Raccoon Creek is a tributary of the Ohio River in western Pennsylvania. So it's about 40 minutes or so north of Pittsburgh. And if you're not familiar with the area, Raccoon Creek in many ways is really a beloved outdoor place where people boat, fish, hike. I think when Heather, when you and I and Captain Evan were there were people out jet skiing near the mouth of the Ohio River. Obviously, the Ohio River, an iconic waterway. Pittsburgh's Three Rivers supplies drinking water for millions of people in the watershed. And so this is really an important outdoor place for folks in Western Pennsylvania and certainly downstream, which adds, I think, even more heft to why this case was so important. But maybe to start us off with a little more background on how we actually got to the case and all the work that went into that, which was really the hard work of the Three Rivers Waterkeeper Mountain Watershed Association. I'll turn it over to Captain Evan, and maybe you can start us off.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Captain Evan Clark. I get to be your Three Rivers Waterkeeper. We work as Three Rivers Waterkeeper around the greater Pittsburgh area, about 40 miles up the Allegheny and up the Monongahela and down the Ohio River, down towards the Ohio border. And that's kind of the area we're going to be talking about today, is about 30-ish miles down the Ohio River. First of all, as well, I'd like to thank everybody who did a lot of work pulling this together, especially Wanda and Heather. So let's see. So in around summer of 2022, we started working in that area, running this trawl that you can see on the screen here with Mountain Watershed or Yaak River Keeper, Yakagani River Keeper. And we were really interested in setting a baseline because there was Shell's ethane cracker plant was about to open up. And we were really interested in the amount of plastics that were in the river previous to that. So we were pretty focused on that, and we were looking for polyurethane nurdles, pretty classic little plastic chunks about the size of a nerd candy or a grain of rice or something. So again, using that trawl, dragging it alongside of the boat. We had a whole protocol doing that, and also doing other patrolling kind of activities in the area. And then early, or actually in late September, we started seeing something unusual in the water, that we couldn't really identify. These very, very, very small plastic particles that were getting caught in our trawl net that looked nothing like the nurdles that we were used to seeing in the water. And if you look at that picture on our right-hand side, and there's all those tiny little grains of plastic that are pretty sharp contrast to the bigger, chunkier white pieces. Those larger white pieces are kind of a classic polyurethane nurdle that would be used. It's a pre-manufacturing plastic that, it's either would get set to a facility that would make slinkies or automobile parts or whatever. But these small little plastic grains were something we weren't really able to identify at first. And we weren't sure what they were until we started to see them coating the riverbanks. And you can see in this slide here on these leaves, we had a really alarming day where, as we worked our way up Raccoon Creek, which is it's navigable for about a mile. So we had our larger boat in there. This for about a mile in the river, the banks, all of these plants everywhere around there were covered in these fine grains of plastic. And obviously, we were really concerned, and we traced those back to a source at this facility, Styropec. It's interesting, actually. Styropec had just bought that facility from Nova Chemicals. We had a hard time even figuring out what was going on over there, especially because that outfall was coming into the river from underwater. It made finding the source even more tricky. Um, but as we worked on, first tracing these back to Styropec, we started to see these plastics everywhere. We found them in the mud near the outfall where they had settled out. We'd found them obviously in our trawl. We'd found them in wetland sediments in the area, and we were really concerned as these were clearly coming out of an outfall, and this was something that definitely looked to us like a violation of the Clean Water Act. We're losing solids or losing garbage out of outfalls. And we went to PA Fish and Boat, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and the EPA as well, looking for anybody to take a stand and get these plastic pellets to be regulated coming out of these outfalls, with no luck at all, with about a year's worth of trying, as well as, of course, reporting our findings to Styropec as well. So I think, Matt, is this a good time for you to jump in on the story?
I can take over here. Mm. Yeah, so thank you, Captain Evan, and thank you everyone for pulling this together tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Matt Donahue, and I was the lead attorney on this case. I am a senior attorney at the National Environmental Law Center. We're a nonprofit legal group that works with groups like Penn Environment and Three Rivers Waterkeeper to bring citizen suits under environmental laws. So this case is an example of that. I want to talk a bit about how we were able to bring this case, because I think it's important for people to have some context for how the Clean Water Act works. And then I'm just going to go through some of the specifics of the settlement with a focus on things that we achieved in the settlement that we expect will have a big impact on preventing plastic pellet pollution at facilities even beyond Styropec. So to begin, I want to explain, like I said, why we're able to bring this case. As Captain Evans said, this was a Clean Water Act citizen suit. That means that we filed a lawsuit alleging that Styropec was violating the Clean Water Act. As it says up here, Styropec operates under a Clean Water Act permit. When companies like Styropec want to discharge either industrial wastewater, which would be the water that is generated when they're doing manufacturing on the site, or if they want to discharge stormwater, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's rainwater that washes over a facility, grounds, and then washes into a public waterway. When companies want to discharge those types of water, they need to apply for a Clean Water Act permit, and the permits say exactly what can be in their wastewater. So it has limits and identifies pollutants. And again, as Captain Evans said, if you discharge water with pollutants that aren't allowed in your permit, then you're violating the Clean Water Act. It's as simple as that. And that was our theory of the case here. It was that every time Styropec was discharging plastic pellets, it was violating the Clean Water Act. And that's because the pellets are a pollutant and they aren't in the permit. So one of the things that we were happiest about in this settlement was that Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection joined us in the case and then signed off on this settlement. And that means that an agency has adopted our like stringent view of how the Clean Water Act should work. I mean, that gives our settlement extra weight. And we think it'll make it easier for other groups around the country to hold facilities accountable. On to this next slide, I want to emphasize that there was a strong track record of Styropec losing plastic pellets in Raccoon Creek or discharging them. You can't file a citizen suit like we did over just like one isolated incident. You need to develop a track record. So you heard Captain Evan talk about the Nurdle patrols that he went on with his team, and those found nurdles. He did 17 nurdle patrols between September 2022 and December 2023, and he found nurdles at 16 of them, which is a pretty good batting average, especially when you consider that his nurdle patrols were just 15 minutes long. So it's just literally a small snapshot of the day. And then we were also able to use additional evidence. So as Captain Evans said, they notified the DEP before they ever contacted NELC, my firm, and they told them that they thought the Styropec was losing nurdles. So eventually DEP did do its own site visits and confirmed that the facility was losing nurdles or plastic pellets into waterways. And then the company, once it sort of saw that, once it received the complaints and once it underwent a few inspections from DEP, although it initially denied losing nurdles or plastic pellets, it did do its own inspection and confirmed that it was losing them. We can go to the next slide, Heather. So with that sort of pile of evidence confirming that they had a problem, the company had a problem losing plastic pellets, we actually started settlement negotiations pretty early on, almost immediately after we sent out or filed the complaint. And I think there are 5 big components to this settlement. The first is that Styropec agreed to pay $2.6 million in penalty payments for the violations that happened in the past. And of that 2.6 million, 2 million is sort of earmarked for attempts to remediate the nurdles that are in Raccoon Creek and around the facility. That means to try to fix the damage that was done from past nurdle discharges, plastic pellet discharges. And another 500,000 of the 2.6 million is going to go to a general fund for the benefit of the Ohio River and Raccoon Creek, sort of larger watershed. The company also agreed to redesign its stormwater system. Although we initially thought the case was going to be about the processed wastewater, losing plastic pellets in the wastewater. That's the underground pipe that Captain Evan was referencing. Once we filed the case and we did a site visit, we learned that the facility was losing a lot of plastic pellets when it rained and the rainwater washed over the facility. It was losing a lot of plastic pellets into Raccoon Creek. and into the Ohio River. So the companies agreed to essentially, they have a 3-year window under this agreement to redesign their stormwater system to ensure that there are no more plastic pellet discharges. And then similarly, they've also agreed, they idled production at the facility during the pendency of this lawsuit, but they've agreed that if they want to restart production, or if they want to sell the facility and the buyer wants to restart production, that they will undertake similar steps to ensure there's no plastic pellets that are being lost in their wastewater. And they have 2 years to do that. And then this is the two really sort of big components of the case that we're really, really proud of, is that to ensure that the facility isn't losing any little plastic pellets in its stormwater, the company has agreed to install cutting edge monitors at every location or a discharge point where stormwater leaves the facility and enters a public water body. And these have only been installed in one other instance, which was another Citizen Institute down in Texas. And at that time, the monitors were literally the size of a tractor trailer truck. And we learned that they are now about the size of a bread box. They're much less expensive, and they do an amazing job of scanning water streams and pulling out any plastic pellets that would otherwise have been released. And we think that the fact that Styrapec has agreed to install these monitors at this facility, and Pennsylvania DEP has also agreed and signed on to a settlement where these monitors are being installed and used, is a major step forward in attempts to hold facilities accountable, because it has sign off now from industry and agencies. And finally, Styrapec has agreed that if any nurdles are found in those monitors after it's redone its stormwater system, they'll pay automatic penalties for each time a nurdle is found of up to $3,500. And I'll be available to answer any questions folks have at the end. But for now, thank you again for having me tonight, and I'll pass it off to Heather.
Thank you. My name is Heather Holton Van Tassel. I'm the Executive Director of Three Rivers Waterkeeper, working alongside Captain Evan Clark. And I'm here to talk a little bit about the broader impacts and what does that mean for communities, particularly around Raccoon Creek and the Ohio River Basin. So the first most important thing is to understand why plastic is a pollutant. I know I'm going to be a little bit of preaching to the choir, most likely for who signs up for these types of webinars, and you probably know more than I do, but we're going to just talk about it a little bit here today on why this case is so important about establishing that zero pellet loss regulation. One is that plastic pellets are not benign in our environment. Plastic in general is not benign. There can be a lot of different impacts on the ecosystem as well as public health. These tiny plastic pellets will continue to break down into smaller and smaller and smaller plastic pieces until they become invisible and can have the potential to be intaked into our drinking water sources, which then can accumulate into our body. They can also be intaked in aquatic species, which we may or may not eat as fish for consumption, and also intake into our bodies. And so this can cause a lot of different issues in the body, and it has a lot of different chronic diseases such as heart disease, cancer, autoimmune disorders. And so when people are talking about, well, who really cares? It's just plastic. It's just something unsightly, right? Well, actually, we're still gathering data, but we do know it impacts the body. Where to the point where there's really fancy diagrams made about the impacts of plastics on the body, and it is known that at least each person here most likely has a quarter size amount of plastics in our body. And because that accumulates, it causes a lot of different issues. And here you can have neurodevelopment disorders, hormonal issues, respiratory disease, cardiovascular disease, metabolic diseases. It can impact your reproductive health and pregnancy outcomes. So these are all associated with plastic chemicals. And it's not just going to harm us. So if you're thinking, well, we're getting great drinking water standards, they're going to take the plastics out of my water eventually. There's also still a lot of impacts to our aquatic life and our ecosystems that we rely on as well. And so one study has been really finding that these plastic nurdles, these plastic pellets floating around actually can absorb additional chemicals that are in the waterways itself and carry them to other parts of our region and impact our wildlife that way. You were seeing pictures of these plastic pellet nurdles. And one thing you might have noticed is they look kind of like fish eggs and they're floating on the surface of the water. And all of a sudden, we have a lot of aquatic life eating them, from birds to different types of fishes. And that can accumulate in their body and potentially move into spaces where we might consume fish. And we also have different types of sediment impacts. So what you also saw in those photos is those plastic pellets settling on vegetation and in the sediment. So those plastic pellets don't have the same densities and ability to absorb water the same way that our soils do, and they definitely cannot sustain life. So when you mix all of that plastic in with our sediment, you're going to have impacts on the vegetation as well as aquatic life. So knowing that all these major impacts are happening with our aquatic life, our wildlife, the vegetation, as well as our own human beings and public health, it's really important that we start setting these standards for zero plastic pellet in our waterways. Because once they enter our waterways, they can be really challenging to remove. Luckily, this project has set aside funds to do remediation along Raccoon Creek. And here I'm just showing you some of those photos of why that remediation is important based on those impacts we just talked about. You can see here along the riverbank all of the sediment that has now been impacted by different plastics, the vegetation, it's on sticks. And so as much as possible, that's going to be removed from the system to prevent it going further down into our waterways, continuing to break down and impact our wildlife and aquatic life, the better off we are as a community. There's also going to be funds set aside that allow community organizations to do conservation and education work around improving the watershed itself. And so having those broader impacts for the community, for the harm that they've experienced, is going to be really important for, actually helping this community recover from this type of pollution in the long term. And so I hope you really understand why this case is so important, because of the ecological and public health impacts that plastics in our waterways can have, and the ability to actually correct the issue, create remediation, and set standards across the nation. And so I'm now going to pass it back to David, who's going to wrap up the importance of this project and help us navigate the Q&A session.
Thanks, Heather. Obviously, we heard a lot about why this case was so critical for Raccoon Creek, tackling illegal plastic pollution, the Ohio River. But at the same time, we think that this case really, as this slide says, has really a nationally precedent setting factor to it as well. And, I think this is something that, at least for me, is a huge takeaway from our effort here, on top of the big victory and historic victory against Styropack. The real takeaway that, our federal court settlement in this case with a company that's the self-proclaimed largest polystyrene manufacturer in North America for nurdles, for pellets, proves a couple things. Number one, that, as Matt said, the plastics industry through this case basically acknowledges that they can achieve a zero tolerance standard, basically zero discharge of plastic pellets at major facilities like this one. I think Matt or Heather can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at the height of this facility, they were producing something like 125,000 tons-ish, give or take, of pellets every year. So a massive facility producing a lot of plastic pellets. So number one, the industry itself is acknowledging that they can get to a zero discharge of plastics, which is a huge statement and big victory. Number two, as Matt noted, state regulators at the Department of Environmental Protection here at Pennsylvania, state regulators, even in a gas drilling, fracking friendly, plastics friendly state, can be willing to enforce a zero discharge of plastic pellets. And as Matt noted, being able to get state regulators to come to the table and to agree with a settlement that sets a high bar and sets a precedent that should be a model going forward was a huge step. And we really haven't seen that in a similar plastics case anywhere else around the country. And number three, as Matt noted, that the real-time monitoring technology exists that can ensure zero discharge from these industrial outfalls. And so I think for Three Rivers Waterkeeper, NELC, Penn Environment, this case is really a landmark case because it becomes a roadmap, not just for getting Styropek and its facility to a zero discharge of plastic pellets, but that it should really serve as much more than that for what any one facility can do. And in fact, the most groundbreaking parts of this case is that it sets the parameters through this lawsuit that could be implemented really in any state for any plastics manufacturing facility or distribution facility around the country. And a couple of things that I think we're trying to do coming out of this lawsuit so that instead of it being a one-off, that there are things that are replicable to tackle plastic pellet waste in other states. Number one, trying to get the word out to state regulators all across the country that they can take sort of the technical parameters of our settlement, that technology that Matt talked about, and really roll them into plastic facilities' existing clean water permits back in their respective home states. Folks may know Clean Water Act permits come up for reauthorization every 5 years. So that should offer the opportunity as those get reviewed and opened up to recommend and implement best available technology like the things we're requiring Styropek to do. And really using that and showing state regulators what Pennsylvania DEP supported to move the needle. Secondly, we're going to be asking state regulators in states around the country, they can do it, as I originally said, permit by permit, but they could also just implement a statewide rule or protection requiring all facilities to implement this technology the next time that their permit comes up. So they can do it more systematically or require them to do it to apply for basically an amendment to their permits to do it sooner so that we can include this no discharge requirement. And this is probably the fastest, most efficient way to do this is really, if the politics work well in certain states where they have leaders in their environmental regulatory administration, you can ask them to make this a blanket policy in their state to address plastic pollution and inform them about the technology and practices that are coming out of our case here. And then, of course, state environmental groups like the groups here, citizen groups, state environmental agencies can basically do what happened in this case with all the hard work that Three Rivers Waterkeeper did. And when identifying facilities like this in neighborhoods or communities across Pennsylvania or around the country, take legal action to stop illegal discharges of pellets, and then take these parameters from our settlement and put them into future cases where local citizens are uncovering illegal pollution. So anyway, we think this is a really groundbreaking case because you now have the industry and regulators acknowledging that we can get to a zero discharge, and that should be replicable at facilities and in states all across the country. So as you can see, this is a real opportunity to take the best practices and implement them all across the nation. So with that, maybe I'll wrap up, and we're right around 6:30. We can get to some Q&A. I think, Wanda, are you going to lead us on Q&A? Folks can put questions into the chat. Wanda put a note in as well, and we can take questions from there.
Great. Thanks, David. Hi, everybody. My name is Wanda Wilson. I'm with Penn Environment, and I'm the Western Pennsylvania advocate, and just going to help us see what questions we have and get them sort of organized. So feel free to either in the question and answer function or in the chat to type your questions. First, I think the first one we've had is talking about the cost of the monitoring system. And does this case help to establish that companies can spend less on monitoring than on penalties?
I'm happy to take that one, Wanda. So we didn't specify an exact monitoring system in this case, but what we did do when we were putting forth the monitoring requirements in the consent decree, which is the document that memorializes the settlement and is filed with the court, is we spoke to the engineers who made similar monitors in the past. And the first time they made it was for a case down in Texas against Formosa, and they had to spend millions of dollars developing the technology. And we were told that they have similar technology that is about $100,000 now to operate it and install it. So it's orders of magnitude cheaper than it used to be. And again, like anything else, once they start getting more widespread implemented in more widespread in a more widespread way, then the price will continue to drop down. And then as far as penalties in Clean Water Act cases, so there's a max penalty that can be imposed for each violation. But the way it works in practice is that sets the ceiling, and then courts will work to ensure that the penalty makes it so it erases any sort of economic benefit or any benefit to the company for violating or for not having the correct equipment in. So, sort of by definition, the penalties should always be higher than the cost of coming into compliance, and that's sort of how these penalties are set in case.
Thanks, Matt.
I think next we'll go to a question about the facility and whether it's an open facility or whether it's closed, it's not operating currently. So there's, a question about, did this case or this settlement, push this company into bankruptcy? What was the situation with the facility not being operational?
Yeah, so I can feel that one as well. To answer in short, this case did not cause the facility to stop operation. As the company, there's a lot of factors that go into things like this. Starapec bought the facility in 2020, and it is a very old facility that has gone through a lot of different iterations of what was produced at the facility. And their public statements, which we have no reason to disagree with, says that just getting the facility up to a place where it would be profitable was going to cost them too much money. So they stopped production at the facility during the pendency of the case, but they had, at the time they stopped production, our understanding was that they had the controls in place to stop plastic pellet discharges when the facility was operating. And the company is still going to make a significant investment in getting the stormwater under control, because even if the facility isn't operational, they still, every time it rains, the water runs over the facility grounds and carries any plastic pellets that are at the facility and sort of littered all over the ground or in old pipes or wherever they may be into public waterways. So there is still sort of project that's larger in scope than what would have been required to get the production under control with the stormwater, and that's ongoing.
And for what it's worth, too, I'll throw an opinion in here too, which is, even though personally I could make an understatement of the year and say I'm not the biggest fan of styrofoam. It's going to be produced, and I would much rather it was produced at that facility in a place that I can keep an eye on it, rather than having that production capacity pushed off to India or Mexico or anywhere else.
Speaking of keeping an eye on it, we have a question about how people can get involved with citizen science activities, like what was discussed here tonight as part of building this case.
I can speak to that one as well. I think that the best resource that's out there really is something you can look up online at nerdlepatrol.org. Uh, they're an outfit based out of Texas, nonprofit that has a lot of resources online about how to look for nurdles, even classroom and educational kits that they'll send out to folks. And really importantly to us, actually, too, they maintain a map of folks who have done their nurdle patrols and the results online. It was basically built as a citizen science technology that was designed to be admissible evidence in court. And it's a really simple protocol, actually. It's not what we were doing with the trawl off of a boat, which was using some more specialized equipment, but literally just working along the riverbanks to look for nurdles for a measured 10 minutes, take some pictures and upload your data to go on this national map. And that map's been really useful for us too, as we've been realizing the extent of the nurdle issue that we've had, we're realizing that we have here in Western Pennsylvania, even up in the headwaters of the Ohio River, where everybody, I think, typically thinks of nurdles as a marine, ocean issue. We find incredible amounts of plastics, and we're still doing a lot of work tracing them back to their sources.
Maybe can I add a couple words on that quickly, and then I don't know, Heather, if you have stuff to add. I would say there's also the annual Nurdle Hunt, which started this year, and I'm sure they'll do next year. There's sort of a fun way to get out, learn about the issue, and help identify plastic pellet pollution. I actually have, I can show folks here. This is one of my samples of nurdle collection near Lake Erie at an old train depot site that I collected when I was driving through the city of Erie. And so as Captain Evans said, you'll find a lot of these, pellets, headwaters along lakes, rivers, streams, but the nurdle hunt's a good way to get involved. And as we try and do more citizen monitoring and crowdsourcing of data. So certainly folks want to do that. That's great too. Thanks.
I'm gonna actually make one, sorry about that, one final note on there too, is that I am always interested in work that other folks are trying to do, and I guess I didn't get into the weeds on the details of our trawls and some of the other ways that we quantify the work that we do. So if folks did want to reach out to me at Three Rivers Waterkeeper, we'll be happy to kind of have a one-on-one conversation about what we've done and the sort of techniques that might work in their area.
Next, we'll go to a question about did Section 127 apply in this lawsuit? If not, can amendment be any help in battling air and water pollution?
Yeah, I'll field this one as well. This is a reference for folks and that was been in the chat to the Pennsylvania Constitution, and Section 127 guarantees, Pennsylvania citizens, or gives them a right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment, essentially. To answer your question, as to this case, we strictly relied on federal law. That's usually what most citizen suits rely on, although you can incorporate some state laws in addition to that. So we did not use it in this case. We relied entirely on the Clean Water Act. But do think that Section 127 and similar sections in other state constitutions can be a really powerful tool in the right setting. To answer your question, yes, I do think it is something that people should keep in mind when they're bringing these cases especially if they're focusing on sort of state law claims.
And then we have a question about the monitoring technology and if there's is there advocacy happening for more of the technology to be more widely adopted?
I,
Oh, you go ahead.
So absolutely. And internally through Rivers Waterkeeper, we pay a lot of attention to permit applications. So industries asking to get limits and requirements for discharges into our waterways. And we can now start asking for similar technologies be added to their permit requirements with that monitoring technology. So as an organization, that is definitely something that's on our list to ask the department to start including on water discharge permits. But as community members, that is something you can always get engaged in civically, and that's contacting your local legislators, and you can share this information with them. Hey, did you see this lawsuit? Do you see this technology? Is there a way for you to push for encouraging that technology being adapted into every discharge permit, particularly the facilities that deal with plastic pellets? So for individual civic duty, calling your legislators, writing your legislators. Don't get discouraged if you feel like your voice isn't heard. It absolutely is. And the more of you saying the same thing to the same legislator is more likely to make the difference. And then internally with organizations, we're going to continue to push it as well.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I think it's such a good question, and a big part of what we have to do now is, as I mentioned, really work to get the word out, not just around Pennsylvania, but around the country. We've done a lot of lawsuits at Penn Environment over the years with the National Environmental Law Center, and I can't tell you how many times the state or federal regulators come to the table, and even they're not up to speed on the best available or existing technology. And we've been in cases where the companies say, oh, we can't address the pollution you're asking us to address. There's no such technology out there. And state regulators listen to them. I think they want to trust them and think that their engineers know what they're talking about. But lo and behold, it ends up that there's a facility 3 states over that has been implementing the technology, and it's working perfectly well and reducing their pollution. So I think on my, glass half full days, I think regulators are, swamped. There's too much work to do to regulate pollution. There's not enough regulators and environmental cops on the beat. My glass half empty day, they need to dig a little deeper to get all the facts if they're going to be making sure we have a healthy environment and polluters comply with the law and use best available technology. But I think this is really a critical part is we have this technology that, as Matt said, has come so far in so few years. We have a huge facility, manufacturer acknowledging they can do this. We have regulators acknowledging it can be done and should be done. We have to take all that together and, really scream it from the hills and the mountaintops as other states and to regulators to go, everybody should implement this in their states and their jurisdictions to rein in this plastic pollution, which is so harmful and so common. So I think that behooves us as organizations and the public, as Heather said, to advocate for that across the board. Let's see. I don't know if we have other questions, Wanda. We're
That's
set.
all the questions I see.
All right. Well, that's great. Thank you everybody for joining us. I think we can wrap up. It's a little past 6:45, but want to thank everyone for joining us. Want to thank Heather and Evan from the Three Rivers Waterkeeper, Wanda for setting up and making sure the logistics are running smoothly, Matt and all the team at the National Environmental Law Center, and all the folks here and that are involved with our organizations that make all the work possible. So hopefully this was informative, and we'll be doing more webinars and other topics. So make sure to join us in the future too. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thanks, everyone.